Alright, what's going on, everybody? So, yesterday I decided to binge watch the recent Netflix original series, Record of Ragnarok. Record of Ragnarok is an anime adaptation of a manga written by Shinya Yumimura and Takumi Fukui. The series has a very simple plot. The gods have decided that they want to end humanity, but a Valkyrie named Brunhilde proposes that they give humanity a chance by initiating Ragnarok, a tournament that would decide their fate. The tournament would consist of 13 humans against 13 gods, with the goal being to win 7 matches. If the humans can manage to win, they will continue to exist for the next 1,000 years. If God High School is like anime Tekken, then Record of Ragnarok is sort of like anime Mortal Kombat. I have a lot of negative things to say about this series, but I do like the concept of gods from different mythologies going up against historical and biblical figures. I wasn't immediately sold on the idea until halfway through the season though. The authors have their own unique depictions on some of these people and fictional characters, some of which, like Adam and Kojiro Sasaki, I actually liked. They give the humans superhuman-like power, but it's explained in a way that makes sense within the context of the story. There really isn't a lot of story in this show, but the backstories on the different fighters and lore are sprinkled throughout the fights. The first 5 episodes cut away from the action way too much, and the flashbacks and lore dumps contribute to the problem. Instead of focusing on the action, the series takes up a lot of time in the stands with people reacting and commenting on the fights. To make matters worse, there is barely any action within the first 5 episodes. I swear the first episode has around 18 minutes of characters just talking. The most action in the beginning was probably during episode 3, and that was around 4 minutes at most during the end of the episode. In episode 2, for example, Thor swung his hammer and Lobu slashed him. That was it. It does get better starting from episode 6, although episode 9 is mostly a standoff accompanied by backstory for one of the former gods of Olympus. There is only a few seconds of action during the flashback in that episode. It's very dull and there isn't really any tension to the fight despite how the spectators are reacting. It's really hard to get invested into a battle when you're constantly being pulled away from it. As I mentioned before, the show presents the backstory for the fighters and lore as well as the origin of their special techniques. Lubu and Dor's material was very uninteresting to me, and at that point in the series, I just wanted to see them fight each other. Lubu, Dor, and Poseidon are the least compelling fighters in the series so far. This is unfortunate because a large chunk of the first match consists of backstories for Lobu and Dor. I've seen Lobu's type of character done much better in other series. He's essentially a warrior that has gotten so powerful that nothing could challenge him, and he longed to face someone who's stronger than him. I imagine that as manga readers were reading some of these fights in their head, it was probably playing out like Jujutsu Kaisen or something. If you haven't seen this show yet, I'm warning you right now, don't go in expecting exhilarating, dynamic fights accompanied by top-notch animation, because you will be disappointed. I was ready to write Record of Ragnarok off as one of the worst battle series I've seen in recent years after watching the first 5 episodes. At its worst, the action is subpar, and at its best, it's somewhat serviceable. There are battles in Fairy Tail that have better animation and are more engaging than the ones shown here. The studio behind this animated adaptation, Graphinica, really does the bare minimum. Don't expect shifting perspectives, clever transitions, or camera movements that could really elevate these fight scenes. The animation is very limited. Expect to see a lot of looping of the same handful of frames. Near the end of Adam's fight against Zeus, it basically turns into a slideshow for a brief moment. Outside of the fighting, the studio made some really questionable decisions in my opinion. For example, whose bright idea was it to have a CG Hermes playing the violin right beside a dancing Zeus during his intro? It was a completely unnecessary use of CG, it was ugly, and a lot of time was wasted on that intro. I'm hesitant to call the production of this show average. Aside from the animation, the soundtrack is forgettable and the voice acting is a mixed bag. A lot of the music that plays throughout the show sounds either generic or like a knockoff of better tracks from other series. Rarely do I ever skip opening or ending sequences, but the first part of the song that plays during the opening was so bad I either fast forwarded or skipped the whole thing. I watched the English dub for this series, and from the moment the narrator opened his mouth, I said to myself, this ain't it, Chief. The voices took a while to get used to, but there were some decent performances such as the voice acting for Brunhilde, her sister Gol, and Loki. Despite all my grievances with this series, there are parts of it that I found entertaining, most of which occurred during the second half of the season. As I mentioned earlier, the first match was boring, but from a writing perspective, I thought the conclusion was decent. The second and third matches feature a lot more action and finally brought in some tension that the first battle was severely lacking. There was a lot less cutting away, and the backstories for Adam and Kojiro were actually entertaining. At first I didn't like this depiction of Adam until he revealed his true motivation for fighting. Record of Ragnarok features a unique take on the Adam and Eve exile story that was the most enjoyable backstory in the series. I like how they took something from the Bible and then put their own spin on it. I won't spoil what his ability is, but if you've seen Naruto before, then you've seen something similar to it. Adam's fight against Zeus is easily the best fight in the show so far. There is tension, suspense, and even a bit of foreshadowing to a big attack during the first half of the battle. You'll probably be able to predict the outcome of the fight as it reaches its conclusion, but the ending is good and meaningful. The remainder of the season focused on Kojiro's fight against Poseidon, a god who simply ignores others that he views as lesser or weaker than himself. I liked Kojiro's underdog story of a swordsman who never won a match and created his own way of training and fighting through simulation. The third match has a decent conclusion, not nearly as memorable as the previous match, but it's just as meaningful in terms of the story. The other characters introduced throughout the season were mostly forgettable. Zeus is the typical eccentric pervy old man. Brunhilde is mostly serious and prone to using profanity and letting her emotions seep out sometimes. She wants revenge against the gods. I wouldn't quite call her sister Gaul a comedy relief character, although the very few chuckles I got from this show usually involved her. Gaul is much more emotional than her other sisters, and throughout the season is filled with anxiety as the fights transpire. Loki comes in around episode 7 or 8, and he's one of the few gods I liked just in terms of their personality and character design. I'm not the biggest fan of the art in this, but I did like some of the character designs. Shiva, Loki, Gaul, Brunhilde, and Hermes all have great designs. I wasn't a big fan of the designs for the big-breasted Aphrodite, Thor, or Zeus. Overall, Record of Ragnarok is a mediocre action series with an atrocious first half that is dull due to its poor pacing, sparse action, and lackluster fight scenes. While it does improve going into its second half, I can't recommend watching this even to fans of the manga. This was like watching a poor man's version of the Dark Tournament arc from Yu Yu Hakusho. If you've seen Record of Ragnarok, let me know what you guys thought about the series. I'm curious to hear how fans of the manga feel about the adaptation. As always, if there's an anime or manga that you would like for me to do a review or a first impressions on, consider becoming a member of the channel by clicking the join button, donating via the PayPal link in the description, or become a patron at patreon.com/FEARnoHate. Whether you decide to donate or not, thank you guys for watching. I'm out of here. Peace.